Excel is to list out the milestones that you want to include in your project timeline. You'll need your dates as actual dates here in Excel. You'll need your milestone descriptions as text, and you'll also need a third column of plotting points to do this correctly. And it's important that you vary your plotting points, 1, 2, 1, 4, etc., and you'll see why that's so important in just a second. Once you have all your milestone data set up with nothing selected, you can see I'm in a blank cell, D17 here. You'll want to navigate up to the Insert tab. In the Charts group, select the first scatter plot option, which will give you a blank chart. This is what we'll use to create the project timeline, and I'll put it next to my data and resize it like that so you can see what I'm doing a little bit better. To add your milestones to the chart, right-click the blank XY scatter chart and find the Select Data option in the right-click menu, which selecting that command opens up the Select Data Source dialog box, which can be a little bit scary at first, but just stick with me here. You want to start by adding a data source, so select Add, and you can see that our scatter plot starts to take some shape behind the new Edit Series dialog box we're in. For your Series X values, select the Edit Series command, and then simply click and drag with your mouse to add your dates as the X values for the scatter plot. With everything selected, click the Edit Series command to return back to the dialog box. For your Series Y values, again select the Edit Series command, and this time click and drag your timeline plot points for the Y values. With everything selected, close the dialog box, click OK. That's all we need to do here in the Select Data Source dialog box. So click OK again, and you'll see your timeline beginning to take shape with your dates moving horizontally across the X-axis as the timeline, and the varied Y values creating those milestone markers. And I'll talk about varying the heights of those milestone markers in just a minute. To now turn your scatter plot into a timeline, select your chart and open up the chart elements up here on the right. The plus sign, open it up. Let's start by removing the grid lines. We won't need those for our timeline. And then let's also come up to the axis options, click the arrow on the far right, and unselect the primary vertical axis to remove it. For a couple of other quick adjustments, let's add our data labels. We'll want to use those for our milestone markers in just a second. And you'll also want to select the error bar option, which will make sense in just a second as well. And you can obviously pause the video at any time if you need to catch up. Next, to turn your error bars into milestone markers, simply right-click the X-axis and choose Format Axis to open up the Format Axis dialog box. Now here in the dialog box, select the downward facing arrow at the top to open up the secret little selection menu that not a lot of people know about. Let's start with the Series 1X error bars. Come over to the tipped over paint bucket icon and select No Line, which removes the horizontal error bars that we don't want in our graphic. With the X error bars fixed, open up the secret little selection pane menu option again. This time select the Series 1Y error bars. Navigate to the error bar options, the little chart icon. For vertical error bar direction, simply choose minus as our timeline is at the bottom of our chart. And then for the error amount, select percentage, highlight the percentage, and just type in 100%. Hit enter, and I'll close the dialog box and click away so that you can see the drop lines we now have for our milestone markers for our timeline. As a next step, let's add our text descriptions to the timeline as the milestone markers. We don't want them to just be numbers. To do that, right-click the X-axis, select Format Axis again. I'm going to move the dialog box here to the right a little bit. Open up the secret little selection menu. This time select the Series 1 data labels and make sure you're on the label options here, the little chart icon. You want to remove the Y value, you don't want the number, and instead what you want is to select the value from cells option. Selecting that option, you should get a familiar looking dialog box, what's now called the data label range dialog box. Choose the Edit Series command. Click and drag with your mouse to select the milestone text descriptions. Click the command again to close out of editing. Click OK, and if I again close the dialog box and click away, you can now see the milestone markers are now added to the timeline, which is looking a little bit better, but we aren't finished yet. Next, you can make your timeline look more professional by adding some styling options to the graphic. To do that, let's start by right-clicking the milestone markers and select Format Data Series. In the Format Data Series dialog box, select the tipped over paint bucket on the left. Select the marker options, open up the fill options if yours is not already open, and to quickly add some color, I'll simply select the vary colors by point. Next, let's add some formatting to the error bars themselves. To start, simply select the error bars in your graphic. Again, navigate over to the tipped over paint bucket. For line color, I'm going to open up the color palette and choose a light blue, and for transparency, I'll just highlight this, type 50% and hit enter for a little bit of design effect. I'll then close out of the dialog box and click away, and you can see this is already looking a lot better, but I'll show you how to do this even better in PowerPoint in just a minute. Now, the next thing to be aware of is that you'll likely need to manually adjust the height of your milestones to fit your graphic here in Excel as your project data changes. For example, notice that if I change the plot point for checkpoint B to 1 and hit enter, the milestone drops down on my graphic. And if I change the next one to 1 as well, this overlap is what you want to avoid, and what I'll show you how to automatically do in PowerPoint in just a minute, and why you'll need to continually manually adjust your chart here in Excel as your data changes. And I'm going to hit Control-Z to undo those changes. Now you can also, if I type -1 and hit enter, drop a milestone below your axis if you're overlaying another series of data as project tasks either above or below your axis, which I won't get into here. It's fairly complicated and difficult to manage here in Excel, but I'll again show you how to easily do that in PowerPoint in just a minute. Now, another common adjustment you'll want to make for your timeline is to trim off the blank space on either end of your graphic so it looks more professional. To do that in Excel, simply right-click the x-axis, choose Format Axis. I'm going to move my dialog box off to the right here. The way to do this is to adjust the minimum and maximum bounds, which will adjust your x-axis to get rid of that space, which does take a bit of trial and error to figure out what works best, and something you'll need to continue to adjust as your graphic changes if you use Excel. In my case here, I'm going to increase the minimum bound to 42,350, which I've already tested out, and hit enter. And notice that the time scale on my x-axis changes here on the left. And for my maximum bound, I'm going to decrease it by 100, so 43,150. The x-axis in my timeline adjusts, and I'm going to close out of my dialog box. Now, there are a ton of other adjustments you can continue to manually make here in Excel, but let me show you how much faster and easier this can be in PowerPoint. To turn this same information into a PowerPoint graphic in a fraction of the time, I'll select the data, both the date and description, and then select Copy up in the ribbon.